Hey there, island dreamers, locals, and anyone craving a slice of paradise. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to the Fun in Key West podcast, where the vibe is always laid back, the stories are salty, and the drinks, well, they're definitely frozen. I'm your host, Michelle O'Connor, your unofficial tour guide to the Conquered Public. Whether you're planning your first trip, your fifth trip, or you're just daydreaming about trading the cubicle for the ocean breeze, you are in the right place. Here's the deal. This podcast is your insider's guide to all things Key West. We're talking where to eat, hello, conch fritters and key lime pie. Where to drink, spoiler alert, there will be rum. Where to stay and all the quirky, wonderful things that make Key West the one-of-a-kind paradise we all love. Plus, we'll keep you up to date on the latest happenings, festivals, events, maybe even the occasional Hemingway lookalike sighting. And just to keep things spicy, we'll be bringing on some amazing guests now and then, locals, business owners, and people who know the island like the back of their sandy hand. So grab your flip-flops, pour yourself a cold one, and let's escape to the island state of mind together, whether you're tuning in from your hammock or your commute, while wishing it was a hammock. We've got all the Key West goodness coming your way. Thanks for being here. It's going to be a lot of fun in Key West. Let's dive in. Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Fun in Key West podcast. And today we are diving into a treasure chest of stories, history, and a whole lot of Jimmy Buffett vibes. Why? Because we have a very special guest joining us today, Chris Harvey. Chris is the January author of the Fun in Key West Book Club Book of the Month, and he's the brilliant mind behind Son of a Pirate. This book is a swashbuckling adventure that blends pirates, Key West, and a whole lot of Buffett-inspired energy. So whether you're a parrot head, a history buff, or just someone who loves a good story, you are in for a treat. Let's set sail and get to know Chris Harvey, author, adventurer, and a man with a family legacy as rich as Blackbeard's treasure.
Welcome to Fun in Key West, where every day feels like a mini fest. Grab a drink, take it slow. We'll show you where the locals go. Food, fun, and stories to tell. Hidden gems you know so well. Your Key West experts here to say it's fun in Key West every day.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Fun in Key West podcast. And today I am so excited because we have Chris Harvey here, who is the January author of the Book of the Month Club or the book for our Fun in Key West book for January. And we're going to get into pirates and Key West and Jimmy Buffett. And it's going to be a lot of that type of energy because his book is called Son of a Pirate. So, Chris, I'm going to give you a little bit of a time to introduce yourself. So let's start at the beginning. Who is Chris Harvey?
Who is Chris Harvey? Well, Chris Harvey is a Massachusetts-born parrot head. Started following Jimmy back in the 80s and just fell in love with his music and his lifestyle. And then 18 years ago, I got a chance to move to Florida. So now I live in Florida, not far from Fort Lauderdale. And I have been a marketing executive. I've worked in marketing and sales in the tech industry for a very long time. And a couple years ago, I sort of retired from that and started my own business. So, retiring essentially meant I had to be a lot busier for starting my own business. And for some reason, at the same time, I decided about a little over a year or so ago, actually probably almost close to 2 years ago, I said, you know what, why don't I write a book? I don't have enough free time on my hands now. So let me try to write a book. And so that's what I've been doing. That's where I've come from. So it was sort of like, I like it. Think of it as like Jimmy Buffett, where he used to say, is there's someday I will, is one of his songs, and talking about like, don't say that you'll never do something, say you'll do it someday. And that's kind of the way I thought about writing.
There you go. So if you are watching us live, be sure to let us know you're here so we can do a shout out and say, hey. And as we go through this conversation, if you have a question for Chris, put it in the chat. We will check it out and see what our best to our ability answer that question. So let's dig into a little bit, Chris, of this. So you are literally the son of a sailor. And so talk about your family's connection to the sea. And I think it weaves itself very well into this book.
Right. So my father's father was a merchant marine. He actually was from Scotland, and was shipping war materials and things like that back and forth during World War II to the U.S. In fact, it was in Maine where he met my grandmother. And then going back a little further, my dad's great grandfather, or was it great great grandfather? It gets, I think it was great grandfather, was a sailor where he sailed masted ships, right? And he covered the coast from Maine all the way to Cuba and back, doing all kinds of things, worked his way up from a sailor to a first mate. Never quite was the captain of the ship, but in fact, he must have been quite a lover as well, because I think he was married 4 times during his life. He wasn't ashore very long. Mostly, I mean, when he was living in Maine, it was with like his brother or something like that. None of those marriages, unfortunately, worked out, but they worked out long enough so I got to be descended from him. But
there you go.
And then if you go further enough back, this is one of the things about genealogy. I love genealogy, and that's sort of a thread a little bit through the story too about family legacy, is that I'm eventually trace my ancestry back all the way to the Mayflower.
Wow.
So that was a fun thing to look at all the research and work through the records and look through the family lore to eventually find all the way back to 1620 when Stephen Hopkins stepped foot off the Mayflower into Plymouth.
That's awesome. So do you think, after having read the book, and for those who have not read the book, I don't want to give away too much, but do you think somebody who didn't have that background in the sea and understanding of all of that would been able to pull it together or have the story that you told?
Yeah, I think so, because even though my family, it may be in my blood, the sea may be in my blood, but I am not somebody who has been, though I've lived close to the sea my whole life, whether it be in
Right.
Massachusetts or down in Florida. I am not a sailor. I've
Okay.
tried a few times, just not quite picked it up. I have a healthy respect for the sea, but have not really embraced it, like I'm sure many other people have. So I think you can be a sea novice. You can have never even been to the beach, and I think still enjoy the book.
Oh, I think so too. But I think what's interesting as you read the book, there's a soundtrack that plays a lot. And let's talk about that soundtrack behind the book. How did Jimmy Buffett influence this book?
Well, I think there's a lot of, in fact, there's like 13 different lyrics that I've sort of strategically, secretly placed in the book. So
Yeah.
there will be definitely times where you'll notice you're like, that's right out of a Jimmy song. And I think the main character is a gentleman named Teach Taylor, and he is descended from Blackbeard, and he runs a Key West tour down in, well, I was saying Key West, but it's Jimmy Buffett based. So he
Right.
goes to all the Jimmy Buffett haunts. So like he is obsessed with Jimmy Buffett. That's part of his, like the nuance of his character. So I think that anybody who's a parrot head or anybody sort of who loves Key West gets a little bit of a view of how Jimmy saw it, or how like tourists see it. So
Mhm.
there's a little bit of both. And I think that if you kind of embrace a little bit of that Buffett lifestyle, I think it resonates pretty well.
Oh, I do too. And I think the stories that Teach gives, that you get a little bit of an insight on when he gives his tours, lend to that storytelling that Jimmy Buffett had in his songs.
Mm.
I think that those lyrics kind of, even if it's not quoting a lyric directly,
Yeah.
your brain will go to, especially if you're a Jimmy Buffett fan, to one of those songs, and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, and it starts to play in your
Right.
head. Yeah.
Yeah.
Teach does a lot of conversations, and you can see that he lives his life right on the edge. Just, this is what I'm going to be doing. And I think he really embodies that someday I will life.
Mm.
And I'm sure you did that on purpose, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I think he's a carefree spirit type, right? So he is somebody who is trying to make the most of his life, knows he's got just one life to live, so he is trying to get the most out of it, and he's loving fully. He's embracing his life. Like I definitely give the impression that this tour is not something where he just works at. It is something he created for himself, and it gives him that time to explore that family legacy. So that's where it sort of talked a little bit about the genealogy. There's trying to imagine if your ancestor is somebody like a Blackbeard.
Right.
And you think to yourself, like, what does that mean? Like, how do you live up to that? It seems like it would be a heavy sort of weight. And then you sort of want to feel like you're living a special life because he did. Um, and then also there's the aspect of it that there's the family lore about hidden treasure somewhere that he's left behind that no one's ever found.
Right.
So that drives him as well. He's like tour guide by day, treasure seeker by night, until it sort of starts to the ideas and the clues start to come together. So he's able to chase it more vigorously.
Yeah. So I read somewhere, and maybe I it didn't get the whole story right, but you started this idea. The seed was planted for this story because you were doing some research or found something about Blackbeard. Is that
I
correct?
was well, I was reading a book called what is it? The History of Pirates. By Howard Pyle. And it's like an old book from like, over 100 years ago, and talking about all the different exploits of the different pirates. And definitely was reading some things about Blackbeard and his exploits. And I said, I really, it struck me kind of all at once. It's like, try to imagine if my ancestor, well, I'm descended from Blackbeard. Like, what would that mean to me, right? How
Right.
would that change my life? And then I thought, well, okay, well, and almost immediately the Jimmy Buffett song, son of a sailor and a pirate looks at 40, sort of merged together in my mind. I said that would make it a fantastic story. Like, and instead of it being someone my age, it would be somebody sort of younger, and they're more idealistic and more sort of out there doing, looking for that treasure. And so that's kind of sort of like, and it just started to snowball from there. It really grew out of that kernel of an idea. And I think that's probably what happens with a lot of books, is there's that kernel of an idea that just starts to sprout, and then it just gathers wings. Before you know it, you're like, oh, what? And then he would do this, and then he would do this, and then
Right.
this character would come in, and who would be trying to stop him? And and it all starts to come together in an amazing way.
That's awesome. And what's interesting about your book, and what I want people to understand, is you're going to pick it up, and it's not the typical story. You're weaving in three timelines and three
Mm.
stories in this, so it's almost you don't get lost in it at all. But you're absolutely, just as something exciting is getting to happen in one of the storylines, you pop to another storyline. What made you think about it interweaving these three storylines?
Well, it's interesting that you think of that. You say that because I think that's what actually makes the flow of the book, one of the things, go so fast. Because I've talked to so many people who said I read this book in like a day or 2 days or things like that, because you got the multiple stories and they sort of end sort of abruptly at each chapter, and then you're like, I got to keep reading, and then you sort of really fly through the story. Just those pages turn almost by themselves. Now that part obviously is fantastic and not necessarily intentional, but the three timelines started off thinking about Teach and his search for Blackbeard's treasure, and then how could you have a story that's about Blackbeard's treasure and not have Blackbeard? So
Right.
that becomes another timeline. So you've got a timeline of sort of the present day. Then you've got a timeline of the golden age of piracy in the 1700s, where Blackbeard, ruled the seas. And then there's another, like, interestingly enough, you said, well, you could have stopped there. You've got two great timelines. And then the third timeline is around the conquistadors of the 1500s. And you start to understand, put the the pieces all together about, like, where did these treasures come from? Like, what is the source of, all of a sudden Spain became the richest country in the world and New Spain formed, and that was because of the conquistadors dominating and taking over Mexico and in South America, Central and South America, to become this, major world power. And then they started sending all this treasure back to Spain, and it almost necessitates the piracy, because people, the haves and have-nots. The haves, Spain had everything, and England and other countries were like, well, we want some of that,
Right.
and we can't go in and win Spain, so we're going to exploit and take over those Spanish galleons. And sometimes it was done by privateers, which were sanctioned by the crown, and sometimes it was done by pirates who were just doing it on their own.
Yeah. If you're joining us live, be sure to say hey or ask any questions that you have of Chris. But what's interesting is you weave in through these three storylines some research. There is some history based on. So the question is, did you have to change your story from what you assumed you were going to have after you started doing the research? Did anything pop up and go, oh, I'm going to have to change my thought process on that?
I think that's what I think is this really serendipitous process of writing this book, is that when I would reach out, and when I thought, I go, geez, Cortez, like if I'm thinking about somebody, Cortez, taking over the Aztec Empire, but he's only got a few hundred conquistadors with him. How could he possibly do that? And I go, well, I would write it that he assumes the persona of an Aztec god. And then when you do the research, you're like, that's exactly what he did, because, and sometimes there's, fairly famous down here in Florida, is at one point the story talks about this 1715 Spanish fleet that is laden with gold and silver heading from Cuba up going to Spain, and it hits a hurricane, which happens quite often down here
Right.
during the summer months, and all the ships are lost off the coast of Florida, which is actually where we get the name for the part of Florida called the Gold Coast.
Right.
Because even to this day, sometimes doubloons will wash up on shore. So like I did a lot of research, but I will say that every time I felt like I needed a plot point or something that would tie together between now and the past, history supplied it.
There you go. Yeah. And Kelly's saying she loved this book.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's what's interesting. And I've talked to a few other authors who have based their stories on history, but have taken liberties with it. And their stories were usually validated with history as they started to dig into it. And isn't that funny how human nature does that?
Exactly, right? Yeah.
So, as you were I was fascinated with Blackbeard. I loved the way you wrote him and how much of a character you made him, like more human, and have actually, you could relate to him. Now, that didn't make him a good guy or a bad guy. I was able to humanize him outside of, what you normally see. And I love the ideas of that he had his beard,
Yeah.
fuming. What made you decide to make Blackbeard more relatable or human versus just that is, that enigma that we always see?
Right. Well, I think Blackbeard's been mostly portrayed kind of a caricature, right? So he starts off, he's very, bluster and bravado and like scary with his, right, having his beard with fuses in it to intimidate. And it's funny because there are people who are like that are like they bully and they're over the top because that's helps them get what they want. And in the sections where he's taking ships and he's like trying to capture and bully other captains and take their treasure, he is like that.
Yeah.
But you see a side of him. I think he really gets humanized. And it's honestly, when I started writing the book, I didn't really think like he would become an empathetic figure. But I think by the end, you're like, he's like a good dad, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
he
know.
becomes like obsessed with like his family and his place in history, his place in the family lore. He's looking out for the woman he loves and his kids, and he's got many children by many different people.
Yep.
And he's cognizant of the fact that he has a responsibility to like his progeny. So
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because you could easily just say, oh, he's just an evil person, but then even evil people like have families, and he's evil in a certain way, right? He's like, if you were a Spanish captain, you thought he was the devil himself. But if you were a member of his crew, you thought he was a fatherly figure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what, as I started to, get deeper into the book, I'm like, oh, what happens next? And you weren't like rooting for him to do bad or something to happen to him. You were like, oh, he's just like us. Uh, so you have, I think, as we've been talking and as I've done some other readings and researched kind of what you've been doing, you have favorite passages of your book. And what is your favorite part of the book?
There's like, if you'd like me to, I could read this one. It's
Please
just
do.
like a couple paragraphs that I really think sets an impressive tone about thinking about piracy in a different way.
Okay.
So, so this is on page 30,
Mhm.
and it's the first chapter to introduce Blackbeard. So, life aboard the ship was not easy. The salty air mixed with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the cries of men toiling at the rigging were punctuated by bursts of raucous laughter and bawdy songs. Yet, for all its hardship, it was a life of unparalleled freedom. Here, there were no kings, no laws, no masters, only the open sea and the code of piracy. Men who had once been bound by the chains of poverty or oppression now chose their fates, even if those fates often ended at the hangman's noose or sinking beneath the waves. And that was the paradox of piracy. These men, for all their violence and thievery, had grasped a truth few dared to pursue. Life was fleeting, brutal, and uncertain, but it was meant to be lived fully on one's own terms. The Queen Anne's Revenge was not just a ship, it was a vessel for their dreams of freedom, their defiance of a world that sought to grind them into dust. She carried not just a crew of outlaws, but a declaration of independence against the tyranny of the age.
I can see why you choose that one to read. It really resonates and makes us understand the basis that you're presenting piracy in.
Right. It's, obviously it's like, as a law abiding person, you think of it as this bad thing and how these people were such horrible. But it's interesting, over the many centuries, pirates have been almost treated as heroes, as anti-heroes. And part of it is because even in that time, you had so many people working on fields and working in shops and feeling like they had no control over their lives. So they saw it very much as these people were taking risks and chances, and yes, they were breaking the laws, but they were somehow not vilified, but they were looked up to as like they could aspire to be folks like that. And these folks pirates welcomed the fact that they were going to live a short life, but they were going to live it on their own terms.
Yeah, yeah. But I think that weaves into also how Teach lives his life.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it's, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think it's how you think we should live our lives.
I would, yeah. I mean, I try to think of it as, if you're in that horrible job that you hate, it's, the person keeping you there might be you. Like, find a way to get out of it, right? Not necessarily turn to piracy, probably not a good idea. But if you have to, no. I mean, look at Bonnie and Clyde, like how they've been sort of thought of as heroes back in the day and things like that. We always sometimes look at righteous thieves sometimes in a way of heroes, because they do control their own destiny in a way that it's so hard for many of us to do.
Yeah. I mean, the Robin Hoods of today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. You have said that you wanted and tried to get this book to read like you were watching a movie.
Yes.
So you would have all three timelines interweaved in this movie. You have ideas of who would play certain people? Like who would play Teach? Do you know? Have you thought
Uh,
about it?
that's funny. I'm sure if I asked my daughter, who's a 20-something, she would probably say Timothy Chalamet, like that. He's
Right?
very super popular. I'm not sure who. I I don't know of anybody, sort of probably a youngish actor. So maybe Timothy Chalamet would be perfect. I could see a Jason Momoa type being like a Blackbeard,
Yep. Yep.
I don't know who would. Oh, Giselle might be like Ariana de Armas. Like,
Okay. Okay.
she's a Latin beauty herself, so that would make a lot of sense.
Yep.
Trying to think who else, but those would be sort of the top main characters.
Yeah. So if anybody's out there listening who has a movie studio, you're open to the idea, and if we can get these wonderful people to bring these characters to life on the screen, that would be amazing. Again, if you're watching live, be sure to put in your comments. Let us know where you're at. If you have any questions for Chris, let us know.
Hmm.
But the really cool thing is, once you finish Son of a Pirate, there's a second book, right?
Yep, I've got it right here.
One
One.
particular harbor. So
Yeah. Do you
obviously,
see
we're
a theme with the Jimmy Buffett
I
continues?
do see the theme. So is that the song that plays in the back of your head as you are reading that one?
You know, it's interesting. What started out with that book is the much of the book takes place. Captain Morgan is featured
Mhm.
as so. Blackbeard is not in this. Well, I won't give it away.
Give
So
it
Captain Morgan is is featured in this one, and he is. There's a siege of Portobello, one of his most famous pirate exploits, and
Mhm.
Portobello is a treasure city in Panama.
Okay.
So it's actually there's a song called "A Cowboy in the Jungle" by Jimmy Buffett, which I
Yeah.
absolutely love, one of my favorite,
One of
and it
my too.
talks about and he's off to Portobello when his money all ran out, and that actually was what really thought of it. In fact, it was very close to being called a pirate in the jungle, and my wife told me that's an awful title, and it is. And that's a pretty awful. It is a pretty awful title. So, but Portobello is a beautiful port, and it becomes that one particular harbor, um, and it sort of weaves its way through the story that way.
Awesome. Do these books have to be read in order to make sense?
I think the second book could be read on its own, but I will say that there's a lot of events that happen that do refer back to the first book. So I think to get the most out of it, you probably want to read the first book because there are things about like there's some threads left at the end of the first book that you can read the first book and never read another one of my books and be happy. And you'd say that was fantastic. At least I hope you'd say that. But you might say like there's a couple threads that you would say, hey, what would happen next with
Mhm.
Teach and Giselle? What would happen with this? What would happen with that? And that's where that second book picks right up where the first book ended, and it starts that logical progression of what would happen next.
Yeah. And I think it allows the readers to say, okay, I fell in love with these characters and now I want to follow them and see what else happens, what's next. So if I get involved in these two books,
Mhm.
am I expecting a third?
I we have to have at least a trilogy, right? So
Yeah,
no,
that's
I'm actually in the process of writing the third book right now. And I will say this is the first time I've ever told anybody, but you keep this between us. Is the working title for the third book is "When the Coast is Clear," and also another reference to a Jimmy Buffett song,
Mhm.
um, and actually brings us back to Blackbeard. So
Mhm.
Blackbeard will become the major pirate in this story. There'll be other pirates as well, but it takes an interesting turn. And I will say I'm about a third of the way through writing the book, and it was going to make the best movie. It really will be the best movie. That first chapter will grab you by the collar and say, don't dare put this down.
Good, good. Because what I like to do through our book club at Fun and Key West is expose people to new authors. Because actually, this book just came out last year, right? Son of a Pirate.
Yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of
Yep.
publishing Son of a Pirate.
Yep. So we like to expose our readers to books that they probably wouldn't think about or know about,
Mm,
but also tease them into a series so that they
mm.
can really dive in and take ownership of these characters. So, what is you are, I think, on a book tour? Am I correct on that?
Well, self-directed book tour.
Self
Sure,
directed.
I've done a number of book signings. We did one in Sunrise, Florida, one in Vero Beach. Just this past weekend, we did one in Fort Myers, and on January 23rd, we'll be doing one in Key West
And you will be where in Key West?
at the Key West Island Bookstore
Good.
from
What
five
time?
to seven. From 5 to 7.
So be sure
Come
if you are in Key West on January 23rd, stop in, say hi, meet Chris, buy the book, support Suzanne over there at the Island Bookstore because it is a fabulous bookstore. And
Mm,
I love all the authors that she brings in. Every time I walk in there, she has, when you first walk in this store on the right hand side, if you've not been in the store, it's been a while. If you walk in on the right hand side, she has a bookcase there that's all Florida authors, local authors, books that have some sort of Florida connection, especially Key
mm.
West. Not necessarily Florida,
Yes,
but Key West.
right, right,
And I'm always digging through there trying to find something new
right.
to highlight and bring out.
Excellent.
So, what is the one thing as I close the book of Son of a Pirate that
Mhm.
you want to make sure I take away after I'm done reading that first book?
I think really it's interesting. Is it's this sense of, I think, family legacy.
Hmm.
I'm very, maybe this is just as I'm starting to get a little older. I think more and more about how I'll be remembered, and I think that's one of the things that drives Blackbeard. It's a major driver for him through the book, and it's almost silly for me to say, but there's the first epilogue um, at the very end of the book, and I get choked up every time I read it
Yeah.
because of how sort of emotional it is. At least for me, it is. And I think, like, having written it's like it can't catch me by surprise, So it's just interesting that I get choked up about it. So I think I hope that people, when they read it, it is a fun adventure tale. It is definitely I like to describe it as Pirates of the Caribbean meets National Treasure, right? Because there's treasure seeking, and there's lots of clues and things like that, and those different timelines it brings you through. Like, you see the breadcrumbs being left through the different stories, but something about it, I think, overall, that this idea of lasting family legacy.
That's awesome. And I did get that. I really did. I was like, oh, I get this. So I always ask people when they come on our podcast is you are landing or driving into Key West.
Mhm.
What is your first stop for food? Where do you go and what do you order?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've got in the book, I mentioned a number of different Key West restaurants and
Mhm.
spots, because though a lot of people they think of Key West as just a great place to drink and have fun, I find it a great place to find some food.
Mhm.
So I will say that I'm going to be in Key West next week, and I've scheduled dinner two nights at the same restaurant, and it's the Red Shoe Island Bistro. That place has just blown me away. I like to think of myself as a little bit of a foodie,
Mhm.
and the food there has been just phenomenal. The service, the owner he was impeccable and friendly. I've only dined there once before,
Mhm.
and we went there. We have to go back, and unfortunately, they were closed that next day. That were our last day in Key West, because they're closed, I think, on Sundays.
Mhm.
And I was devastated. I was like, I want to come back. And that kernel kept in my mind so much that I said, this is a place, this is a scene in the book, to make it's for it to be special. So and I mentioned some other places. I absolutely love Santiago's Bodega. I love their tapas, and luckily they have one up in Orlando. I'm up in
Yeah.
Orlando frequently, so
Yep.
I go there quite often. And then we went on a food tour last time we were there, and they introduced us to Cuban Coffee Queen. So, like, that's become a nice, that's definitely probably the first place I'll probably go is there, because if we get there
Mhm.
early enough, I'll probably stop in there for a cafecito, maybe.
Oh, a cafecito. That's what you order, huh? I do a con
Yep.
leche with two.
Yep.
So that's my standard order. Do you have a now Cuban coffee queen is near and dear to my heart. That's usually my breakfast. I always have to split the breakfast sandwich. I don't split the coffee with my husband, but I do split the sandwich. So we always get a Key Wester with bacon.
Nice.
But yeah, so that is
Yep.
near and dear to my heart. I'm not sure if you know this or not, but did you know you can order Cuban Coffee Queen to be delivered to your house?
I did know that. Well, thinking that we're going to be there soon, so I'll probably buy a few bags of coffee to brew them at home. But yes, I did see that. Yep.
Yeah.
But
So I didn't.
I think to make the shipping work out, I have to buy an enormous bag. You know.
But if you go through coffee like I do, it works
Yep.
out well. So
Yeah.
yeah, those are always great suggestions. And
Mhm.
what I like every time I ask that question is everybody has their own favorite place.
Right.
Coffee has always been the constant, so there's always
Mhm.
coffee there, but everybody has their own favorite place.
Mhm.
And so I always
Yeah.
like that. What do you, so you've only been
Mhm.
to your bistro there once, but
Right.
what's on your list or your favorite? What was something that just grabbed your attention? You know for sure you're going to order again.
Well, I know what so I think they have a very small menu, and I think it changes, so it may have changed since I was there. I think I had grouper last time I was there. I just love grouper. It's like something that even on the East Coast of Florida, I just can't get.
No.
On the West Coast of Florida, I can, but East Coast, I can't. So, it's great. When I see it on the menu, I usually jump all over it. But the other thing they had that really impressed me that I thought was unique and interesting was they have lavender cheesecake.
Ooh.
It had this really cool sort of lavender purpley color, and it just tasted delicious, like so creamy. And I just felt like, sometimes you go to a restaurant and so many restaurants will have like 100 things on the menu or 50
Right.
things on the menu. And they do every one of them okay.
Yep.
And Red Shoe Island Bistro has like 10 things on the menu. It might not even be that many. It's like 8 things on the menu, and they do
Moment.
them
Yeah.
all superb, right? I like that when you go to a restaurant where they only have a few things because they can't have something that they can like hide. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they can't, everything has to be good. And
Yep.
that's one of the things that really impressed me. That's why I felt like I could go back like the next day because I was like, I had this, but I really wanted to try that too.
Right.
So, and that's why I can't wait to go. Well, that's one of the reasons I can't wait to go back.
There you go. There you go. Well, before I give you one last word here, I'm going to give anybody that's watching us one more chance to say hey or ask any questions of Chris. What if we're going to wait for that? I'm just going to say, is there anything else you would like our audience to know or take away from our conversation?
Well, I think one thing that might be interesting is there's a lot of great books out there. And I have a really different style, I think, than a lot of authors, and that's intentional. Is I like to be more cinematic. I want you to feel like you're either in a movie or a TV show, and I do that mostly through it being dialogue driven. So, if you like a book that is really heavily describing every situation and everything that the character thinks, and there's a lot of internal monologue, that's not what I do. I kind of leave it like with TV, where you're like, well, that person kind of gave a little look. Maybe that little look meant something, right? So there's more like I trust the reader to kind of imagine what those scenes might be like, imagine what the characters might like be thinking or what's motivating them. And I think that trusting the reader, actually one of the coolest things about it is everybody's experience reading this book is different.
Right.
So if you were to describe Teach, might be different than I do. You might say he's 6'2". I might say he's 5'10". You might
Right.
say he's a little portly, and I'd be like, he's thin as a rail. Like, because I don't overly describe some of the characters, it's how you kind of imagine them. And I think sometimes authors like take that out of the reader's hands and they describe a situation or a character so much that it makes it hard for you to use your imagination in a way that we always used to do, I think, when I was a kid. So I hope that's fun. And then another thing I like to do, just that's kind of the geekness of writing, is I like to change the point of view from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
So in the first scene where Blackbeard is attacking and taking a ship, it's all from Blackbeard and his crew's perspective. Like, hey, we're attacking the ship and we're firing our cannons and we're boarding the ship. And then the next time it's from the ship being attacked.
Right.
They see the black flag on the horizon, and it's getting closer, and they're preparing, and they're the ones. And it shows you like how they would react and their fear and their preparation. So I like to mix that up, just so it makes it more interesting and more exciting, and you get different perspectives on like how would those things be. Because I think many times you would see it like always the pirate attacking, the pirate attacking, the pirate attacking, and you get a little, it's going to be repetitive to some extent. So hopefully it makes it more interesting, exciting, and it keeps you on your toes.
Awesome. No, I like it. Well, let everybody know where they can find your books at.
Well, you can find them both at the Key West Island Bookstore. So if you happen to be in Key West
Mhm.
or on Amazon. Now, I do have them in some select bookstores. You can actually buy them online from Barnes and Noble, but not in the stores yet. But you can find them on Amazon. There's, if you were to Google them, I think they're offered online from different
Okay.
places. But Amazon's probably everybody knows Amazon, so
Yeah.
you can look them up right there, and they're easy to purchase.
Yep. And there's a link below to direct people over to Amazon. And so I appreciate everybody who supports that, because I am an Amazon affiliate. And that's how, if you buy and it's a qualified purchase, that's how it goes to support my book club. So I always appreciate that. But Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and giving everybody an inside look to how you created the books. And I hope all of you go out and buy at least the first one, because you're going to buy the first one and then you're going to want to know the story and how it ends and how it continues. So you're going to get the second one because it's now available, and the third one will be available.
I'm hoping the end of 2026. It
Okay.
takes a little while.
It
It takes a little while, but I mean, I'm writing it furiously and hope to get it out by the end of the year. But I hope not to make anybody wait too long.
Just let us know, and we'll put it out on the book club and on the Facebook group page to say, hey, Chris's third book is out. So
Okay.
I appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for joining us live. For those of you who did, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. And we will talk to you later.
Thank
Right.
you. It was a pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
A huge thanks to Chris Harvey for taking us on a journey through the high seas, the golden age of piracy, and the heart of Key West. If you haven't already, grab a copy of Son of a Pirate. Trust me, it's a page turner you won't want to put down. And don't forget, the adventure continues with his second book, One Particular Harbor, and a third, as he teased, is on its way. Until next time, keep chasing your own treasure, live life on your own terms, and maybe, just maybe, embrace a little bit of that pirate spirit. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.